Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Muse Show. I am so excited you have tuned in for another Wednesday, another day of fantastic conversations. And as you know, this show is all about intersectionality and really doing deep dive and finding really fascinating individuals to really lead us into really cool, dope conversations. And let me tell you, my next guest, he is not going to disappoint. I have been so excited to be in conversation with this brother for a very long time. His intersectionality really dovetails perfectly into my intersectionality, and it's what happens. He has a fantastic book that's coming out that we're going to talk about that and a bunch of other things. I feel like he doesn't really need an introduction, but nonetheless, I will give somewhat of an introduction, and then we'll get into it. This brother, DeVon Franklin, he is an author, he is a producer, he's an executive producer, he is a Hollywood studio film exec. He is just a man all around, and let's just get straight into the conversation, man. What's up, DeVon?
Yo, what's up, bro? How you doing, man?
Welcome to the Muse Show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So excited to be in conversation with you. You have no idea. So this is a show that I could not wait to have, and I could not wait to curate with this.
Man, I'm so grateful.
You just represent something different to me that's fresh. It's fresh in media. It's fresh in Hollywood, right? Yeah. There's not a lot of men out there like you, in particular black men out there that really represent, and then more so someone who stands in their truth, right? It's really hard to stand in your truth in spaces and places such as that. And so I just wanted to say I salute you for being able to stand in your truth. That's not easy.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. And watching you do that helps me, reminds me that there are people out there who also stand in their truth. So keep being a beacon of light, brother.
Of course, man. Listen, we all got to do it. And, when you're doing it, you're not thinking about inspiration. You're just thinking about survival.
Yes.
Like, what do I have to do to survive and thrive? And a lot of that comes from just owning the truth. Saying, hey, this is who I am. This is what I believe. And not being afraid about that. And a lot of times that truth lays the foundation for success. So when I hear people say, oh, man, you're an inspiration, I'm like, what? Like, okay, because I'm not thinking about that. I'm just trying to do what I feel is right in the moment to take me where I'm trying to go.
Well, how was that process like that, right? Because we always hear people say, live in your truth, be your authentic self, right? And stand up into those moments of adversity and not be afraid to be who you are. But that's definitely easier said than done, right?
It is.
And so for you, was it like a muscle that you had to exercise?
It wasn't so much a muscle that I had to exercise. I started working in entertainment when I was 18 years old. I got an internship working for Will Smith.
Oh, nice.
And kind
of heard of him.
Big Will. Maybe you've heard of him. One of the most famous people on the planet.
Exactly. And best Instagram on the planet.
I know, right?
Hands down.
I mean, come on, that dude. Whenever he does anything, it's going to be big.
Yeah.
And so, when I was 18 years old. Before I took the internship, I told them that, I observed the Sabbath. So Friday night, sundown, Saturday night, sundown, I don't work. And I said, if taking this internship would require me to work on the Sabbath, I won't take it. So I that was just me being honest.
Yeah.
Owning my truth. And they said, no problem, we'll work around that. And so I was like, okay, cool. So what I was saying inadvertently was my faith is important to me, but I didn't do it because I was trying to let them know my faith is important to me. I was just doing it like, this is my stipulation, right? This is my commitment, it's my personal commitment. And if you can abide by that, great. If you can't, no worries. I'll look for another opportunity. And so as they made concessions for that and they were cool with it, what I also realized was I've got to become excellent at what I do. Because it's one thing to operate in truth and do a terrible job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You could operate as much truth as you want with no excellence, and it's not going to work very well.
Yeah.
So I think what's really important is it's just not about truth for truth's sake. It's about, okay, I'm going to own who I am, and I'm also going to do the job, and I'm going to do it the best I can possibly do it and learn how that job is supposed to be done. So for me, it was a combination of those two.
But let's talk about that, though, because leading with religion and leading with spirituality can be nerve-wracking, and particularly in places and spaces, because we're always told you can't talk about certain topics. It's sexuality and religion and politics, and particularly in the workforce. And so here you are, 18, with one of the biggest superstars of our time, and you're letting them know you're leading with religion, right?
Yeah.
Did you think about what the consequences could be, like when they look at you differently?
Not once.
Not one time.
Didn't care.
Wow.
Because at the end of the day...
That's amazing, bro.
No, seriously. It was like, this is my conviction.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. And I wasn't worried about their thoughts. I wasn't worried about, perception. I was just like worried about keeping my conviction.
Yeah.
That was my only concern. And at the end of the day, entertainment, in my experience, really truly rewards those that are maverick in nature. If you're bold, if you own how you think, no matter what it may be, I have found more people become more successful in entertainment than those that, try to, sand down the edges of their difference, fit into someone's limited perspective of who they can be. And so for me, in owning my faith, it actually is what's made me distinctive. It actually is what helped me stand out. It's actually what has led to so much success that I've had inside of Hollywood. And it kind of seems counterintuitive because to the point you're bringing up, a lot of times you're taught, oh, don't say those things.
Yeah.
So when you do say them, and I've always owned it personally. I think there's a difference between personal and proselytizing.
No.
And so for me, it was like, I'm not proselytizing. If you want to know more about God, if you want to know about my faith, if you want to know about Jesus, and you come to me, I'll tell you.
Yes.
Right? But I'm not here to preach up and down the halls. If you want to hear a sermon, come hear me preach.
Yeah.
But ultimately, for me, it was about, this is a personal decision. And this is what is integral to me actually doing a good job, because when you're in an environment where you feel fully accepted for who you are,
come on,
you can thrive.
Yeah.
And when you don't, it absolutely impacts your work.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just happening to own what was important to me, which was my faith, and incorporating that into how I operated and worked.
Are you sure you're not proselytizing? Because I feel like I'm in church right now. Just FYI.
Hey man, that's good.
That's what you call a word, brother.
Hey man, I take it.
But what I'm getting from you though is a sense of freedom. I mean, that has to be so freeing for you to do that at 18. And then when you walk into places and spaces, they already know who your identity is. They already know your constitution. So it's almost you don't have to always tell that story again. They already know. Yeah. So I'm getting a sense of freedom from that.
Sure, without a doubt. And where that also freedom, comes to play is that, okay, so when I own that, right? What happens is like, okay, now one of the biggest worries is, can I be me and have success, is getting resolved. Oh, I can own who I am. I can own what I believe and still find success. Oh man. All right. Okay, cool. Now what? All right. How far can we go?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now that that's off the table, I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Now it becomes about doing the work and becoming the very best that I can be. So there is a lot of freedom in that.
And your environment can shape that. And so definitely you're here to talk about the book. And so we're going to weave in the book into this conversation. So ladies and gentlemen, this book that is out right now is What Men and Women Need to Know, The Truth About Men, by my guest here, DeVon Franklin. And I think you kind of led me to a really perfect part in the book where you talk about change your circle of friends.
Yes.
And so I'm a big believer, and my audience knows I always talk about iron sharpens iron.
Yes,
right? And I'm a big believer your community and your tribe shapes who you are.
Absolutely.
And so this passage in the book really stood out to me, right? And you recall a conversation you had with your mother and this quote that she taught you, but really further what got me was that where it says, men's interaction with other men powerfully affect ideas about what it means to be a man and how certain men choose to live up or down to that standard. Curating the tribe of men that you spend time with is an essential part of being the master. To me, what I got out of that is I have a core group of guy friends, and I call them my personal board of advisors, and they shape who I am. They help shape my thoughts. We challenge each other, and we always go to the uncomfortable space and sometimes the awkward space where we can be our truth with each other. But for me, that happened over time. It took me a while to understand who my true tribe was, right? And who I could do that with.
Sure.
So for you being so free so early on in Hollywood and entertainment and media and your occupation, how were you able to define your tribe? How did you seek out your tribe? How did you amass your personal board of advisors?
Yeah, that has been a process. And what's interesting is that, in being so kind of open and vocal about, my faith, in terms of building the tribe, it can kind of cut both ways. Whereas some people, when they know you're serious, because a lot of people in entertainment talk about faith, you know, but a lot of people will say to me, well, DeVon, a lot of people talk about it, but you're really serious. And so that in terms of building the tribe can sometimes be disruptive. Because there can be certain tribes that they want to be about something totally different. And they don't want somebody around who just their mere presence could be convicting to whatever it is they want to do. So a lot of times for me, I've had to just own who I am and find the tribe organically, not even seek it out, and finding other like-minded people that can, especially men, finding other like-minded men that can, help guide me. As much as I know, I still don't know a lot, and I'm always seeking for knowledge and wisdom and information. And even someone like Will, has been a huge part of the tribe. Over the 20 years that I've known him, and the inspiration and information that he has imparted to me, and the mentorship has been critical. I mean, I don't know that I would be doing what I'm doing, sitting before before you, having written, books and producing movies, if I didn't have his mentorship, in terms of articulating and modeling what's possible in the world. And that is something that I matters a lot, because, a lot of times I'm like, man, this is hard.
Yeah.
But then, you get someone like a Will in your tribe, in your voice, and saying, man, come on, it's not about how long you work, it's how hard you work. It's both. It's a combination. People work hard, but they don't work long.
Yeah.
Some people work long, they don't work hard. You got to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
So the tribe is integral. And I think so much of our success, we underestimate the importance of the people around us.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have the right people, it's better to have only one person that's right.
Yeah.
Than to have a whole bunch of people that are leading you in the direction you don't want to go.
Yeah.
So I really talk about this in the new book, The Truth About Men, what men and women need to know, as a way to help men and women understand that our circles matter. Yeah. And a lot of the habits that we pick up, good and bad, come from the people we run with.
They do.
And their values reflect our values and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So if we're trying to go in a new direction, many times we have to run with the new pack.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you just about your Constitution, because I had this joke when I moved to New York City. I'm originally from Michigan.
Oh, okay.
Michigan is a big Bible state,
yes.
a big religious state, right? We have a church in every corner.
Yes, you do.
So I grew up, Mondays in church, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. That was my whole K through 12 lifestyle.
Yeah.
College, not so much.
Yeah. Got free.
College was Kirk Franklin CDs. Right, but then when I moved to New York, I was searching for that and seeking, and I didn't find any ground. But I felt I didn't find anything that was grounded in what I knew religion to be. And so I would joke, and I was like, "Yo, Jesus is not in New York City." And then finally, I found my right church, and I found my right pastor, and all has been well. But I think there's something about having a spiritual constitution as men that opens up this gate of vulnerability, right? Because in church, you end up crying, right?
Yeah.
Worshiping, right? Standing up and waving your hands and offering up a praise, where some on the outside would see that is a little bit different, a little bit strange, right? And so as men, you're constantly owning your truth and vulnerability and authenticity within the practice of spirituality. Mm-hmm. Has that helped shape you when you are in your tribe, right? Mm-hmm. And you're becoming vulnerable with your friends? Because sometimes what I found in friendships I've had with men that wasn't as strong because we didn't allow each other to be vulnerable with each other, right? Mm-hmm. Because we had this idea preset of what manhood could be. Mm-hmm. But I noticed that once I was more vulnerable with some of my male friends who currently are my personal tribe now, the friendship has just flourished. Yeah. And so I'm just curious to you, is that part of the spiritual constitution? Mm-hmm. What is it about a man's constitution that allows for that vulnerability?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter in the book called Create a Safe Space. And it's all about how us as men, we need safe spaces to talk. We need places where we can be vulnerable without judgment. Mm-hmm. Because it's hard for men to be vulnerable, but I also feel like a lot of times our secret fear about vulnerability is the judgment that it will provoke. Mm-hmm. And so I have a whole chapter devoted to how to create a safe space. And even though it is hard to find other people that you can be vulnerable with, in order for our success and our survival, we have to seek it out. Mm-hmm. We have to find others, at least one other person that we can be honest with, we can be transparent. Why? Because the more we hold things in, the more we suppress, the stronger those things we're suppressing become. Yeah. And they can become so strong, they can lead us to do things that can ultimately destroy the quality of our life.
Absolutely.
So it's very, very important to have a safe space. And, I have different people in my safe space that I can call them, they can call me. And that vulnerability ultimately leads to victory, personal victory and professional victory, because we need somebody to talk with to say, hey, I'm struggling right now. Yeah. Yo, bro. I'm dealing with something. Or even in a relationship, the person you're with can be a safe space. Yeah. For sure. They should be a safe space. Mm-hmm. And that's really, really integral. Because a lot of times if you're with somebody and they aren't a safe space, you're going to find yourself seeking a safe space outside of that relationship. Yeah. So it's really, really important with the close circle of people that are around us that we have a safety where we can talk without judgment, without fear that someone's going to villainize us. Because there's sometimes we just got to get it off our chest. You do. There's some things we want to talk about. We don't have any even intention in doing it, but just expressing it helps the feeling or thought go away.
It does. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking with DeVon Franklin, the author of the book, What Men and Women Need to Know, The Truth About Men. DeVon, you're actually leading me to a really interesting point as you're talking, as we're having this really fascinating conversation. I'm curious about your point of view when you began to write this book and what was in your mind, because we're in a society right now where, we're openly talking about how we're not so monolithic, right? Black people aren't this monolithic black folk anymore. We're not one-dimensional, right? Democrats, we're seeing right now the pool that's getting into space don't have this monolithic policies, right? The Republican Party doesn't have this monolithic policies. Women, they're not this monolithic, demographic, if you will. So as you were writing this book, how did you think about that? And I personally felt that you did a fantastic job of threading the needle of that. But that's difficult to do because sometimes when individuals write books of this type of genre, it's so heavy-handed on a one-sided perception. But knowing that men are so multifaceted, we have so many different backgrounds, so many different types of constitutions. When you first sat down and wrote your first word, who were you thinking about?
I was thinking a lot about what you're saying, and I was really thinking about, first was like, okay, the men that'll read the book, and then second, the women that'll read the book. And the biggest concern was, I'm not putting men on trial. I think that's really important because I think
that's good.
As an author, if you're trying a case, then your bent towards what you're presenting is going to be strong as a way to convict someone of something you feel that they've done wrong. And so for men, when I'm thinking about men, I wasn't thinking about trying them or convicting them on their wrongdoing. If anything, I was wanting to convict men with the possibility we can become better.
Wow.
Here's how we become better.
So it's almost an understanding of nuance.
Absolutely.
Which I think we're missing right now in our society. And
yes.
so we mentioned Instagram, Will Smith. Shout out to Will Smith, your Instagram, by the way.
Yeah.
I think we're living in this place of cancel culture.
Yeah,
on
totally.
Twitter and social media, where you do one thing and you're automatically canceled.
Yep.
Right? And I don't believe that we leave enough space for nuance and for understanding. How do you think that... Because at some point we had to begin to have this conversation about cancel culture, right? And begin because everybody's looking at things from this binary choice.
Totally,
right? It's either one or zero.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
Black or it's white.
Right.
How do we How do we evolve beyond that notion to begin to talk about the grayscale and to have that understanding? What you're having is that everyone doesn't need to be on trial immediately, right? But understand the nuance of it.
Yeah. I think it just takes conversations like this. I think it takes, books, entertainment, people, the right entertainment that can foster this conversation, because it's so important to recognize that all of us are human. And as a result, there's things that we're going to do that we don't even want to do. And I talk a lot about this in the book. And part of it is one, having an understanding of that. But an understanding doesn't mean being a codependent.
Yes.
An understanding doesn't mean it's okay. Just because you understand doesn't mean you have to be pacified.
Yeah.
I can still understand and still take a firm stance. So, I talk about in the book, how men, we have to behave better. And here's how we do it. And I tell women in the book, just because you're with a man that you love, don't allow him to do things that disrespect you.
Yes.
Hold him accountable.
Yeah.
Because you love him so much.
Yes.
And even with me giving you understanding in this book, still use the understanding to still be strong with him.
Yeah.
Because if you don't use that understanding for accountability, then you may have it, but you can't use it effectively.
Yeah.
And so I think going back to this cancel culture, I think we have to recognize, it's like, but for the grace of God, there go I.
Come on.
He who without sin cast the first stone.
Yes.
Before you get the speck out of your brother's eye, get it out of your own.
Yeah.
And so, in social media, everybody wants to cancel. Well, if people knew half the stuff that people were, the ones that are saying cancel, if everyone knew what they were doing, they'd be canceled too.
Well,
we all be canceled.
That's a word.
We would all be canceled, right? Because all of us had fallen short. All of us.
Yes.
So, I wrote this book for understanding.
Yeah.
Communication, how we can come together. These are hard issues. They're complex issues. They're diverse issues. There's no one solution.
Yeah.
But once we come together and, we put the swords down and we stop trying to hurt one another and we really seek to find common ground, that's where the conversation can really begin.
So, DeVon, I really believe that God is on your side.
Oh, man, I received that. Thank you.
For so many reasons, man. Like, before you came in, and my audience knows I never write questions down, I didn't know where the conversation was going to go.
Yeah.
I just wanted to just catch a vibe with you.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
to see where we are. Clearly, I knew enough of you
of course.
to take a conversation where we need to go. But I actually wasn't thinking about where we are right now in our society. And the cancel culture kind of just came to me in the conversation.
Sure.
But then I started thinking about the Me Too movement. I started thinking about these big buzzwords that we're doing now with toxic masculinity. That's a key word. So your book is right in the center of all those hashtags, right? And all these conversations that we're having. I don't even think you could have even.
Man, it wasn't me.
Were you even thinking about these things when you wrote this book? Because we all know the book process takes a while.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about them for sure, and I touch on them for sure in the book. But in terms of the book being released right now, and the convergence of all those things happening, and like you're saying, the book, kind of serving, as a potential, resource to help navigate and understand so many of these complex things that are converging right now. And that timing is God's. It's not my timing. And truth be told, I even write this in the book. I didn't want to write the book. Yeah. It wasn't something that I said, I can't wait to write this book.
Yeah.
It came from a series of promptings, and I felt this is what God wanted me to do. I wrote a proposal, sent it to my book agent. My book agent was like, oh man, I don't know where this came from, but we're going to sell this. You got to go do this.
That's called a calling.
There you go. And so, a lot of times we get the call, but we don't answer. So, I just tried to answer.
I've yet to pick up that phone.
Come on, Mike. Pick it up.
I've been fighting a lot of phone calls and text messages.
It's a good
brother.
word.
Listen.
It's a good word. I guarantee
I'm like, God, bro, really? Like right now?
Right now.
Like
Lord,
right
what
now.
you want?
Right?
Send me.
Like, can you call back tomorrow, baby brother?
No. You can't play that game.
At all. DeVon, I could talk to you all day.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for your time
Thank you.
for writing this book. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you go cop this book as soon as possible. And we didn't talk about it, but I just wanted to say, man, speaking of the Me Too movement and all that's happening, congratulations on being elected to the Academy.
Yes, thank
you. One part of the new membership class.
Yes.
The Oscars.
Yes.
And so I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Honored to be a part of the Academy.
I think you're going to do a really fantastic job just knowing your Constitution and really pull up more seats to the table.
Amen.
For more people like us to have more diverse conversations in that space.
Gotta do
congratulations, DeVon. But how can more people reach you?
Yeah, more
on
people
Twitter,
can reach
Instagram,
me.
or
Yes, on Instagram at DeVon Franklin, at DeVon, last name Franklin, Franklin. You can also reach me at the same handle on Twitter, and on Facebook, it's at DeVon Franklin Official.
And as always, folks, you can reach me at I am Mike Muse, MUSNSAME. Grab a snack and come on back with more conversations from a professor who's going to talk about religion and media from Columbia University. So we got some smart folks here today. Peace.
Only the doctors got this, I'm hiding from. Isn't close. Ain't no visit in heaven. I know the difference in blessings.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. I hope you're enjoying that snack. Man, DeVon Franklin was absolutely amazing. I didn't expect all those jewels and those nuggets from him. We really did an interesting deep dive about knowing who you are in this space. And there's something interesting about knowing who you are when you're in Hollywood and you're in media and you're entertainment and you have a religious constitution or maybe a spiritual constitution. How do you reconcile that? We're always talking about in Hollywood and media and entertainment, like how do you reconcile your morals and your values? And we see that happening, and it's coming up more consistently to a lot of issues that are coming up in media. And as you know, it's award season. We're in award season, coming off award season. And there's nothing but these great speeches from our entertainers really talking about their constitution and things that really matter to them as well. As my phone is ringing, some people must want to know and be on this conversation already, man. Give me a second. So with that, I thought I'd bring a very special guest on. He is extremely smart. He's extremely brilliant. He is talented. And I said, you have to come and do this conversation. You're the perfect one to round out the conversation that we were just having with DeVon Franklin. He was sitting in, he was listening. We have Dr. Josef Sorret. He is associate professor in religious department in the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University. Listen, this man got his doctorate from Harvard, or should I say Harvard. He has to teach me how to say it a little bit later on. But he directs the Center for African American Religious Studies, Sexual Politics and Social Justice. I can keep going on and on. His first book was Spirit in the Dark, A Religious History of Racial Aesthetics. He has fellowships and grants from the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, Louisville Institute. I can go on and on and on. Basically, the man is smart. He's a genius. He's intersectional, and he's wildly fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sorret. What's happening, man?
What's up, Mike? Good to be here.
Good to be here with you, man. Like, I'm so happy to be in conversation with you. I think you are just absolutely brilliant. Full disclosure, he and I met through a mutual friend named Aaron over drinks one summer night in downtown.
Set us up for a fight almost.
Literally. And he and I got into it immediately, just out the gate. And That's what I knew, that one, we'll be friends, and two, I just had to have him at some point on the show. And I couldn't think of a better person to help us guide us through this structure. So Josef, how did you even begin to curate a career in religious studies?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So before doing a PhD at a place like Harvard, Harvard, which is seen as like anti-religious, which isn't really the full picture. Have a long background, personal background within sort of evangelical Christianity. Ended up doing undergrad at Oral Roberts University in Oklahoma, right? Named and founded by this historic televangelist. One of the fascinating things about ORU, in the middle of Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's both this evangelical college, and at the time in the early 90s, not to date myself, had the highest percentage of black students of any non-HBCU. So all the ways in which religion and race would come together or not come together on that campus in many ways was the first place where these questions led for me to pursue them in graduate study.
Wow. Now, listen, when you were a kid, you're like 17, 16 in high school, were you thinking this is where you wanted to go? Because when I hear religious studies, I always think people got called into the ministry, right? Should we be looking at it from
I did not expect. Wow, that's a great question. So what I do now, so the study of religion as an academic discipline sees itself, in fact, almost is allergic to this idea of someone working within a tradition, right? It's very much the critical study. So for me, that's both sort of historical and literary approaches to the way in which religion and race show up in American culture, which is not to say that there aren't folks who both study and practice, right? I still identify as a Christian, although Oral Roberts University may not recognize how I understand Christianity as legitimate. And there was a sort of, call experience, if you will. I grew up in that sort of vision of Christian faith that to go on to do an MDiv, which is what I did before doing the PhD, it was very much about what is going to be the role of service to the church for me. But then once in that space, it opened up a whole nother way to think about religion and its place only in my life in American culture, and opened up a whole set of questions that I couldn't even name when I was at Oral Roberts, and said, you know what, I think this is where I want to go. These are the kind of questions I want to pursue, and it really a privilege to be able to build work around these kinds of questions.
Now, how open was Oral Roberts? How open was religious institutions, if you will, for you to be able to explore the things that you're studying right now? Because the way we see from the outside looking in, and full disclosure, I come from a Baptist upbringing. I'm non-denominational currently, but I was in church Monday, Wednesday, Saturdays, and Sundays, so I have a strong religious constitution.
Absolutely.
But I also know from my background growing up that it was very constrained in terms of what was allowed and what was acceptable, right?
Right.
And so how has the church been, or the religious community been, as you have really expanded the conversation on religion and the research aspect of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's both, right? I think on one hand, the public position of religious institutions are often constrained, right? So if I raised a question around race at ORU or around gender, what have you, that was in opposition to the public position, it would be shut down very quickly. Mm-hmm. But as we all know, right, whether at a church, what was said at the pulpit is often different than the rich conversations in the pews or with your peers as a young person coming up. So I think trying to, in fact, that is very much how I go about thinking about the study of religion. Is it's not just the orthodox position, but the set of debates, the contestations that that are always taking place around those positions.
Yeah.
Right? You enter a church and one thing may be said from the pulpit, but depending on the size of the church, there's going to be how many interpretations of what's said or how many interpretations of what scripture's read, right? So I think part of what we try to do as scholars of religion is capture that complexity, tease it out. And so sometimes churches are open to that, right? I do every now and then still get invited to speak at a church or what have you, but there's, I think, limits, right? What goes the classroom in the Department of Religion is not for Bible study, and when people enter church on Sunday, it's not necessarily to complicate. They want to know, how am I going to move from this Sunday to next Sunday? They want answers to pressing questions, and those are not always the same questions that we have in the classroom.
You can tell that you went to Harvard and you're currently at Columbia, because, brother, you said consternation. Most people don't just use consternation casually in a sentence, man. I have to start
you want me to slow it down, Mike?
No, man, I love everything about it. You made me literally rock back in my chair. I said, this brother said consternation. I like that. I'm a big lover of words. So with that being said, and I'm just listening to you, and my listeners know I don't write any prepared questions down. I just go based upon the energy of my guest, and you are giving me so much. I feel like I can talk to you for 5 hours. So I'm already saying out the gate that you have to come back to the Mike Muse Show. You're officially the expert on religion and religious studies here for the Mike Muse Show. So with that being said, I'm curious in terms of how you came into religion growing up, how you view religion now as a scholar, And do you see any differences? And I'm asking you that coming from my own personal background.
Yeah.
And so I'm an engineer by degree, industrial engineering.
Yep.
I did nuclear chemical research. And so science is a huge part of my construct as well.
Yep.
And when you begin to do deep dives and you begin to ask those questions just as a scientist and as a researcher, there is some things that may come into conflict with religion.
Absolutely.
Right? And so how
Yeah.
are you reconciling what you knew religion to be growing up and then as you do more of a deep dive into the scholarly aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? And not unrelated, I think, to what we were talking about before. I mean, certainly, right, coming up when my parents both in different ways became born-again Christians, they were sort of set upon agreed beliefs that organized the church, that maybe were central at home, what we were expected to believe. And for you, as a young person, you may question those things or you may go with them. This is in your parents' roof. Mm-hmm. And then at a certain time, you have to sort of make sense how much of those are going to work for you moving forward. You make decisions about those on your own terms, if you will. And that's a tough challenge, I think, right? Is my parents' faith going to be my own faith? And I mean, if I think about Oral Roberts University as a key point in that transition for me, when I first got there, it made sense, right? This is the world my parents had hope for me. But then you also, as a young person coming of age, you ask questions, you see those inconsistencies, and you pick and poke at them and hope for adequate responses. And so I think what, as I was mentioning earlier, what became clear was, right, all of us are attempting to understand these things that we've been taught, whether religious or otherwise, and how we live those things out is always much more complicated than they appear on paper.
Right.
Right. And so, folks want to say there's a set singular interpretation of the Bible. Mm-hmm. That was very much the context. This is what it says.
Yeah.
And you do what it says.
Yeah.
Right. And you know that not everyone in the church is living and doing what it says, and that, in fact, there is no reading, right, without interpretation. And that, for me, while at once when I first entered into divinity school, it was scary, right? That singular answer was no longer as clear once you begin to dig into the history of the text, how it was understood when it was produced. Yeah. And that's scary at first. You have to let go of that orthodox position that made sense of you. But at the same time, as I moved along in that, it just opened up so much more freedom, right? To own my own perspective, to own what I was thinking, when at first I was told that, what I was thinking may lead me on the way to hell, right? And so you started with thinking about science and religion. We often understand those things as fundamentally in opposition, but it's just not that simple.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not, which is when you really think about, now we're in pop culture, particularly within the hip hop community and particularly in other aspects of it, this whole notion of the Illuminati, right? And so like the secret societies and the secret sect. But when you begin to understand what the Illuminati is from its foundation, I want to be very clear as I state that I don't believe in conspiracy theories. Illuminati is existing right now. I don't think these rappers are part of the Illuminati. So just double down on that.
The whole host of online stories. Yeah. No, absolutely.
But what's really fascinating about that, though, is when you begin to understand how the Illuminati really gained its notoriety, it was because they were all scientists and scholars, right? And they were in opposition of the church and the Vatican in Rome. And the Vatican actually ran them out of Rome. You know what I mean? And so then they had to go. That's really when they became more of a secret society aspect, because they had to hide their true beliefs and their values, but they did it underneath different auspices of sectors, if you will.
Absolutely.
That they will all then come together underneath secret. It was really, in the beginning, this opposition to science and religion, and how religion really framed them as like anti-religion, right? And I guess the devil, if you want to use that in this current society. And even here, you listening to your interpretation, I love how you said, there is interpretation of the Bible, and then there's a letter of the law of the Bible, strict. It's no different than how you juxtapose that to today's policy and politics, right? In terms of the Constitution. So you have constitutional scholars, and then some are the letter of the law, the Constitution is what it says it is. It's literal, right? And then there's some who believe it to be interpretive, right? Which when you see the dynamics of the Supreme Court,
you want to get back to some original intent. I mean, it's very much the same way how to read these texts. That, right? In fact, when they were written, the debates around what they meant were much more complicated than in that appeal to the original, and it's very much the same with Scripture.
It is. So it's like the Founding Fathers, you're always trying to say, well, what was the intent of the Founding Fathers of this country, right? But you're also wondering, well, what was Job saying, right, in the Bible? What was John? What was happening with Paul and Peter? Like, what were they really trying to say?
Right.
And then sometimes we're so poignant just to zone in on one scripture without looking at the whole verse, and then really the chapter, and then the book.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think it's really wildly fascinating. So let's just move forward, because you also have a study in sexual politics, right? And sexual identity. identity. And this is going to be, I think, the hook of DeVon Franklin and Hollywood and media, right? Because there is sexualization of Hollywood. There is a sexualization of media and entertainment. And there's always been Christians, those in religious sects, not just Christians, those of all religious sects, do not want individuals to participate in media in Hollywood because of the sexualization. They're all heathens. They're all anti-God. All these type of things. How do you think we should be looking at media in Hollywood? And what do you say to those individuals of the religious sect who just dismiss everything media entertainment as ungodly?
Yeah, right. This is like the rock and roll is the devil's music. Hip hop's the devil's music. Celebrity culture is just this den of iniquity, right? For the city of sin. If you think of even New York or LA, right? And there is this historic opposition often within certain religious spaces, right? That to cross over is to sell one's soul, right? There's all these myths and legends. I think at the same time, right, when we account for religious traditions, right, different individuals, different communities are going to have to sort through how they're going to understand the relationship to popular culture, but the history of American religion, the history of religion in America is so much more complicated, right? 19th century revivals were in fact a source of entertainment. They might have been the biggest show in town. And I'm not just talking about folks who are charlatans trying to but the actual performance of religion. If you think of the history of African American churches, they were theaters, right? This was the place where the dance took place. So this simple understanding of sacred versus secular is not as simple, right? And so, in fact, now there are so many religious influences in popular culture. You and I were talking about the popular fashion designer, right? Jerry Lorenzo in Fear of God. Very much his evangelical faith was central to that. We think about hip hop music, which was also understood as the latest iteration of the devil's music. But how do we, from Kendrick Lamar to Chance to Kanye, back to Wu-Tang Clan to Five Percenters, religion is so much a centerpiece of all these musical traditions. So certainly there are religious traditions that reject. But I think it's more interesting to think about the ways in which we all religious communities negotiate, right? The popular. Some that are most opposed to celebrity culture still engage televangelism. They're engaging the media, but on their own term, right? You think of some of the biggest churches these days, like Hillsong. Yes. Right? They make strategic choices to launch churches in L.A. and in New York because it influences the culture.
And they have celebrities on their Instagram and they're interviewing, and the decision to close. I've been to Hillsong a couple of times. The smoke machines, right? The lighting.
You feel like you're in the club.
You literally feel like you're in the club. And when you talked about the revival, I didn't even think about that. That's why I'm just jumping in my seat. I'm trying to be calm about everything, because there is this performative nature in religion, right?
Absolutely.
And there's a performative nature, then there has to be some correlation to Hollywood and media, and then how could they be so polar opposites, right?
Absolutely.
And then even when you watch these televangelists, and I currently belong to a mega church, I've attended, so I've seen the smaller churches, but I'm also seeing the larger mega churches, how much of a production that it is. And so it's almost like, how can then one say, we're going to do all this production, the bells and the whistles, and have this performativeness of this religion act on Sunday, but then be so polar opposite, opposed to anything Hollywood and media, when they're using the same type of strategies and tactics in order to bring in parishioners or bring in the sinners to turn them into saints. Just to put it into practical terms.
That's exactly right. And so even when the language is around maintaining purity or distance from is almost impossible to be immune to some influence of popular culture or to even influence popular culture, right?
And then you see it too, Josef, with like the remixing of popular songs through choirs, right? And so you'll see these choirs singing songs, but they're just a remix of what popular music is. And so then I'm like, well, somebody got to listen to the radio.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And largely, right, in many ways, the success of the church is so much predicated on the music industry. And now in some of the biggest churches, it is the ability to do that. That's the story of gospel music, is remixing the blues. I think of about 15 years ago when I was living in Brooklyn, the biggest Baptist church at the time, downtown Brooklyn, come in on Sunday morning and it's the youth group leading worship and they're remaking a Lloyd song, right?
Literally.
I Need You. What is it, right? This is, and what? The whole crowd across generations is moving, worshiping to this song that was, right, originally better suited for yesterday, right? Valentine's Day is romantic love. And that is, in fact, also, right, to where we were, that blurring of divine love and human love, romantic love is very much even in the original text that Christians are taking a lead from, which is to say the Bible. Right?
Even in social media, so regarding like these holidays that come around, like such as Valentine's Day, you hear moments like, God is my man or Jesus is my man, right? So there's all that, which opens up a whole other narrative that we want to explore on today's show. But I've always kind of looked at that kind of side eye a little bit. So you talk Chance the Rapper, I want to bring him in and then bring in a lot of some films within Hollywood.
Okay.
And you led me to a really great point. When I lived in Detroit for like a year and a half, and I was attending again another mega church within the city of Detroit, and I remember telling some of the parishioners that was there that I was now leaving to go to New York to pursue music full time, get in the music industry. Right? So now let's bring in Chance, because Chance the Rapper, his music is very rooted in this gospel narrative, right? The melodic lines. He references God directly and literally, right? And so do you think there is a position for popular culture, for music, for Hollywood to be able to expose, I guess, bring in light in these dark places to use the language of the church and how they treated me?
Yeah. I mean, certainly, right? I mean, you think a way in which Chance, after acid rap, sort of remakes himself and gives his own sort of testimony, right, of struggling with addiction and leaving Los Angeles to come back home to Chicago, which also just happens to be the birthplace of modern gospel. He articulates a desire to make feel-good music, right? It may not call it gospel, but to inject a new feel-good vibe within the hip-hop world. And so, I mean, certainly I think of the impact of Chance in that moment on me. And I think there's an interesting relationship between actually the lyrics, which may be about God, but also the composition of the music, right? Which is very much the same when we think of the performance of the church, the relationship between what's being said and how it's being said in the music. And so I think certainly the aesthetic that Chance brings, which on one hand, of course, is clearly recognizable as hip hop, but also brings in sort of traditional gospel. He's citing folks like Fred Hammond in the sources he's sampling from, right? But then he's also drawing on songs that are more popular with Hillsong, right? Like How Great Is Our God is an evangelical, right? Has its origins in white evangelical music, if you will. And so I think the ways in which pop has always had these religious undertones is very much also part of the appeal, right? So on one hand, we are in a moment when there is space. We call it a post-Jesus Walks moment, right? where Kanye, one can claim Christianity, one can claim prosperity in ways that were previously maybe unimaginable in early hip-hop, right? Religion was often in opposition. But now, sort of the centerpiece. Even it's at the same moment that Lecrae, a former gospel hip-hop artist, tops the Billboard chart. Right? So how is it that...
Consistently.
Absolutely. And not even 10 years before that, gospel hip-hop was corny. Right?
No one wanted to participate in it, and it wasn't even seen as valid.
Absolutely.
And as valuable, but now we see it. And now we see a commercial success. I'm just curious, in your classrooms, in your discourse, because, the generations of how... this new generation, this younger generation is viewing religion. They're not going to church on every Sunday, right? And so we literally see a generational divide now within the churches on Sundays. And so now as these students are now enrolling into Columbia, into religious studies across the country, enrolling into your classes, are you guys having a discourse in the sense of when it comes to media in terms of can you be spiritual and have spiritual leaning assets and still make money?
Oh,
that's always been the dynamic in Hollywood, really, right? And DeVon Franklin, he has this great production company now with Sony, as he was telling us, right? And so he has some films coming out that leans more on the feel-good aspect of life, right?
And not less the damnation.
So have you guys had this type of discourse?
Well, so on one hand, there is a whole host of research out on, say, religious broadcasting, from televangelists to radio preachers or what have you. So it's to look at the role of business models, which you talked about earlier, but it's not quite the same thing as the prosperity gospel, which there is, often the mega church is assumed to be aligned with a prosperity gospel, which is to say, if you live righteous, you'll be rich and wealthy. So on both areas, though, there is now a growing body of scholarship that, Carlton Pearson, who his papers are now housed at Harvard, right? So there is a growing body of work. I have scholars and friends at Harvard, at Princeton, and elsewhere who are calling attention to this. But there's a great body of work on the prosperity gospel. And so I think what that work does, though, is call attention to, right, there's a certain stereotypical image of that associates charity with religion, right? We think of Mother Teresa. That was always a dominant image, but there has just as long been a tradition of preaching that aligned itself with prosperity, whether you think of Reverend Ike, right? Or you think of even not necessarily prosperity, but you think of Norman Vincent Peale's power of positive thinking, right? That embraces abundance, if you will, in the now. And so that's a point of contestation, right? There are certainly folks within a particular model of theological traditions which see an embrace of prosperity as Christianity falling from its true form. But then there are other folks who are doing interesting work in the study of religion that highlight the ways in which Christianity and capitalism have always been entangled. And it only makes sense that in this moment where, right, non-profs are changing their titles from executive director to CEO, following a corporate model, that pastors are doing the same thing. Yeah.
Listen, Josef, I can talk to you all day. That means you have to keep coming back. I think you and I should develop a series to come out of this. Are you down to do that?
I'm down to do that. This has been fun for me as well, Mike.
Let's make it happen, man. I'm so thankful. How can more people reach you if they want to have more of a dialogue with you? Maybe on Twitter?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Josef's, just my hashtag. You got to help me out with this, Mike. It's just simply my full name, Josef Sorret. On Instagram by the same name.
And how they spelling Josef and Sorret?
It's JOSEF That's my feed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the above. If you follow me there, I will do a better job of being present there.
Right? That is awesome.
Absolutely.
And listeners, as always, you can reach me at I am Mike Muse, MUS and Sam E on Twitter and Instagram. Until next time, peace.